Do you know who Gabor Maté is? He is my hero. Gabormate. He's a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. A lot of his family were in the camps. Most of them were killed. And he talks about trauma. He talks about addiction. He talks about trauma. I think he's one of the smartest people in the whole world. I mean, I'm totally in love with this guy. He's like in his 80s, but he talks about trauma and he talks about racial trauma. And he also said behind every addiction is a trauma, but he talks about trauma, how it gets into your body. It gets, and he said, actually, he's Jewish, and he said that the most traumatized kids in the whole world right now are kids in Gaza. He said they are the most traumatized. But he talks about what happens, like especially to people of color, especially Black people in the United States. Also that book. Did you read that book, My Grandmother's Hands?
No, but I know of it.
And it's mainly for Black people, but it's for anybody who's experienced that kind of trauma. And he says in the beginning of the book, he said that the most traumatized people in the United States are Jewish people, Native American people, and Black people because of genocide, history of genocide. And then he has all these exercises that he's like a social worker, psychologist, something like that. And, once you get up there, I don't know whether you're a social worker, psychologist, but he has all these exercises, meditations and exercises for people to do, particularly for Black people, to get the trauma out of their bodies and out of their minds. And then he also has all these exercises for white people to get the trauma of being racist. I mean, the historical trauma. It's really interesting. And he quotes Gabor Maté. But then Gabor Maté says the most traumatized kids in the whole world right now are kids in Gaza, and what happens when people grow up in trauma.
Yeah, I mean, the kids in Gaza are losing everything up to and including their lives. So yeah, they are totally screwed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and this is and anybody's listening. It's not whether you support Israel or whether you support Gaza or whatever. The fact is that kids growing up being bombed like this, and again, it's not about the politics. It's about this is what's happening to these kids, and we have doctors and people who know this stuff talking about this. And when you have trauma or like generational trauma, what did Georgia Good talk about? Post slave trauma. So it gets handed down genetically, and trauma goes through generations. So if your family grew up under slavery, you have that trauma in your DNA. And like if your family were Holocaust survivors, you have that trauma in your DNA, even though they might have been your grandmother or your great grandmother, whatever, but it is in you, and Native Americans too. And you have to be able to recognize that for yourself, because other people aren't going to, recognize it for you. But you have to and look at what it is that you need to do to be able to get past that trauma, because trauma makes us do a lot of things.
This is another example of a possibility of looking at the other side of the coin. You talked about earlier weaponizing privilege. Well, you can weaponize your trauma too. And I think both of us, in a way, have done that by creating our podcast, right? Like kind of the work that we're doing is a way of turning the traumas that we've experienced, our racial traumas, our, the biases and discriminations that we've faced and that our loved ones have faced and that we've been party to and stuff. It's our way of kind of capitalizing on the fact that we experienced those things and we learned what we did, and now we can share that. Now we can communicate using that knowledge, and we can share with other people and pass it on. So it's the only thing that can counteract that generational legacy that's passed down, like you were talking about. We can create our own counter to that, and that is the way we have to do it. We have to do it collectively.